This is CR Change Request. From the Sunday Desk, your structural brief for the week ending Sunday, May 24th, 2026. This week's read covers 12 signals across measurement: the AI buildout, reclassification, labor, and the evidence test. Before we move into the read, here is what I want you to hold while we walk through this week. The quiet story is not any one headline. It is the relocation of cost before the public has language for what is being built. The cost moved into neighborhood heat before communities understood the data center footprint. It moved into federal measurement gaps before maternal health policy could respond. It moved into temporary worker towns before AI was understood as a build-out economy. It moved into a wellness category before anyone admitted what was being rebuilt. And it moved into evidence itself, where war crimes are documented by perpetrators before institutions decide whether they will act. If you operate inside systems, you already know this pattern. The cost lands first. The conversation catches up later. That is the Sunday read. Let me start where the system shows you the most about itself: measurement. Because every system runs on what it counts, and more importantly, on what it chooses not to count. A new study out of the University of Pennsylvania surfaced this month, and the finding sits at a frequency most coverage will not catch. Federal birth certificate data, the system the country uses to measure severe maternal harm, significantly undercounts what is actually happening to women in labor and delivery, not just by a margin, by a structural amount. Do not rush past this next part. It is the piece you have to sit with. Researchers looked at how the federal data captures harm for Black mothers compared to white mothers. The federal system reflected only 16% higher odds of transfusion for Black mothers. The claims data reflected 84% higher odds. That is not a small capture gap. The federal data did not just lose harm, it compressed the racial disparity by roughly 5 times. Now, let me ground that in the population this is happening to. Black women are roughly 14% of the U.S. female population, and they account for about 40% of U.S. maternal deaths. The Black maternal mortality rate reached 50.3 per 100,000 live births in 2023. For white women, the rate was 14.2. And here is the line I want to speak plainly: not as a device, but as a truth the data keeps telling us. Black women with college degrees are still dying in childbirth at higher rates than white women without a high school diploma. Income does not close it. Education does not close it. Insurance does not close it. That is what the disparity actually looks like. And the federal data set charged with measuring this crisis is the same data set that softens it on paper. Hold that for a moment. Maternal health policy depends on what the system can see. If the data captures less harm overall and captures Black harm at a steeper discount, then equity analysis, funding formulas, hospital quality measures, public health interventions, and the political case for response are all built on a partial reality. The harm is real. The disparity is real. The data set is the lever that fails them. And this is the part nobody wants to say plainly. When harm is undercounted unevenly, the public does not only lose accuracy, it loses response time. It loses response funding. It loses the political case for response at all. The federal data does not just miss the harm, it misses the disparity. And what the system fails to see at scale, it fails to fund at scale. That measurement pressure point does not sit by itself. It is connected to who is doing the measuring. And this past week, who is doing the measuring became a much more open question. Reuters reported on May 15th that the Trump administration is moving to strip civil service protections from hundreds of U.S. health agency workers through what is known as schedule policy/career reclassification. And if you have been near federal health policy at all, you already know what kind of worker this actually reaches. Let me make this concrete for you. We are talking about CDC epidemiologists who track disease outbreaks, FDA medical reviewers who sign off on drug safety, NIH program officers who steward billions in research funding, CMS regulatory staff who run Medicare and Medicaid operations, HHS policy analysts who write the rules the rest of the machinery runs on, BARDA preparedness officials who plan for pandemics and chemical threats. These are the people who hold the operating knowledge of American public health in their heads. The public-facing language is workforce reform. Underneath, it is something more specific. It is public health governance being redesigned through personnel status. The operating truth is this: scientific administration depends on people who know the programs, the evidence, the statutes, the enforcement history, and the operational consequences of every decision. When those workers lose civil service protections, institutional memory becomes more vulnerable to political pressure. The statute stays in place. The people who know how to operate it become easier to remove. The pattern is not new. Modern governance fights do not travel through statute repeal anymore. They move through staffing structure. The institutional phrasing is dry on purpose. The consequences are not. Scientific administration is being recoded as political labor. The proximity issue keeps showing up in different rooms. On May 21st, reporting surfaced that the U.S. Forest Service is considering closing 57 of its 77 research labs. That includes labs focused on invasive insects and local forest threats. The institutional language will say consolidation and efficiency. The deeper read goes somewhere else. Think about it this way: ecological threats are place based. Invasive species, forest disease, wildfire conditions, pests, regional climate signals, none of them behave the same in every geography. They behave the way the local terrain teaches them to behave. And the people who learn that terrain are the same people the system is now telling us we no longer need close to it. Federal consolidation can preserve administrative capacity while weakening local intelligence without announcing itself. And proximity is not sentimental, it is part of the method. When science moves farther away from the land it studies, the system may keep the data but lose proximity. While measurement systems are being narrowed, something else is taking shape, and it has a physical footprint people are not talking about yet. Walk with me into this one. Researchers at Arizona State University reported between May 18th and May 22nd that waste heat from data centers can raise downwind neighborhood temperatures by as much as 4 degrees Fahrenheit in the Phoenix metro area. 4 degrees downwind in a region where heat is already a public health emergency in the summer months. This is the moment the cloud starts showing its exhaust. The public sees the app. The local community feels the temperature. Data centers require land, electricity, water, cooling, substations, tax incentives, and local approvals. If they are changing heat conditions around them, communities are absorbing AI's environmental costs before the public has language for the trade. Anyone who has lived next to industrial infrastructure knows how this pattern moves. The benefit travels, the exhaust does not. The cloud was never weightless, it just hid the exhaust. That physical build out does not stop at the server. It extends into the labor and housing layer. And the operator stepping in is not new to this game. Let me show you what I mean. Target Hospitality announced this month a strategic expansion into workforce accommodations tied to AI infrastructure, including a contract expected to generate more than $750 million for roughly 3,370 workers. The headline wants this to be about jobs, local investment, contractor demand, and tax revenue. That story is true. It is also incomplete. The detail that matters most is this. Target Hospitality's core business was housing oil and gas crews in the Permian Basin. They built the playbook during the boom years. They contracted through the bust cycles. This AI contract is not a new model. It is a sector transfer. Think about what AI infrastructure actually requires. It does not arrive as the cloud. It arrives as land use, power demand, water demand, roads, zoning approvals, temporary labor, security, food service, sanitation, transportation, and housing. Before the public sees a finished data center, the local area experiences it as a build-out economy. And the build-out economy looks like permanent growth while it is still temporary demand. That is the hinge. Data centers modernize on roughly 10 to 15-year capital cycles, with internal equipment refresh on faster timelines. That means the build-out footprint is structurally larger than the operating footprint. Construction labor peaks first and recedes. The capital value remains with the operator. The community keeps the infrastructure it built to host the build-out. That is the asymmetry. The cost is local and front-loaded. The value is mobile and back-loaded. The operating truth most coverage will never name plainly is this. A town does not have to shut down to become hollow. It can still have buildings, roads, utilities, and ribbon cuttings and lose the economic engine it was promised would keep them alive. This pairs directly with what we just covered in Phoenix. The data center exhaust lands locally. The data center build-out economy lands locally. The capital does not. Oil and gas did this. Defense contracting did this. Warehouse logistics did this. AI infrastructure is now entering the same pattern with some of the same operators. Everyone is watching the servers. Almost nobody is watching the temporary towns being built around them. And historically, the temporary towns are where the labor story actually lives. AI infrastructure may be permanent. The local economy built around its construction may not be. Same playbook, new sector. The energy decision behind the build out is finding a new lane. And this is one of those moves where the public vocabulary is doing the work for the capital. On May 19th, the Rockefeller Foundation and Temasek Trust announced the Global Coalition for Nuclear Philanthropy, mobilizing philanthropic capital for nuclear energy and next generation technologies. Read past the institutional phrasing. Philanthropy is entering a space historically shaped by states, utilities, defense history, and large scale finance. That means nuclear is being repositioned not only as a technical or regulatory issue, but as a legitimacy project. Philanthropic capital can shape public education, community acceptance, early stage research, and the moral frame around nuclear as climate energy rather than legacy risk. The part worth holding is this: philanthropy often enters contested sectors before public consensus is formed. By the time the consensus arrives, the vocabulary is already set, and the capital set it. And when philanthropic capital writes the language, the public usually inherits a category they were never invited to negotiate. Nuclear philanthropy is not just a phrase, it is a capital signal. The category shift thread runs through the next set of signals. And I want you to pay attention to how the category label is doing the actual work here. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The FDA authorized 20 Zen nicotine pouch products under its pre market tobacco pathway in January 2025. In January 2026, the agency held a public meeting to consider allowing Philip Morris to market Zen as a lower risk option than cigarettes. In parallel, wellness influencers with significant audiences have spent the past 2 years reframing nicotine as a cognitive enhancer. Academic centers, including UVA, pushed back publicly this month. The official story is harm reduction. And listen, harm reduction is real science. Nicotine without combustion is genuinely safer than smoking. That is true. I am not here to argue with the chemistry. But the cleaner read is sharper than that. Three levels are advancing at once, and they are advancing together. The regulatory level is separating nicotine from combustion, which gives a known dependency compound a legitimate marketing pathway it did not previously have. The capital side is doing the actual work. Zen posted roughly $3.24 billion in sales last year. Smoke free products now account for about 41% of Philip Morris International's net revenue. A canister of Zen reportedly generates around 6 times the profit of a pack of cigarettes. The cultural channel is doing the legitimization. Wellness voices are positioning nicotine as a cognitive tool, even though the strongest research signals are mostly in already impaired populations, and the effects in healthy users tend toward neutral or negative. The dependency profile, however, is not narrow. The dependency profile is the most reliable feature of the compound. That is the part the wellness frame is walking around. When the regulator, the capital, and the cultural narrative align around the substance, that is not a wellness trend. That is a category build. And anyone who has watched this pattern before knows exactly where it goes. That is the part that changes the read. Dependency markets are not eliminated, they are reclassified. The product changes form, the harm profile is recalibrated, the terminology is laundered through health framing. The same industry collects higher margins on a lower stigma product. Opioids did it. Sugar did it. Alcohol did it through the wellness frame. Nicotine is mid cycle in the same pattern. Harm reduction is real science. It is also a marketing pathway. The question is not whether nicotine without combustion is safer than smoking. The question is who is buying the reframe and what category they are building underneath it. Regulatory relabeling is not only happening to substances, it is happening to uncertainty itself. Minnesota became the first U.S. state to ban prediction markets after Governor Tim Walz signed legislation criminalizing the operation of platforms like Kalshi and Polymarket for event-based contracts tied to politics, sports, war, weather, and other outcomes. The law is scheduled to take effect August 1st. Almost immediately, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission sued Minnesota to block the ban, arguing that prediction markets sit under federal derivatives jurisdiction. The real decision is happening here. Prediction markets do not simply let users bet on events. They turn public uncertainty into tradable contracts. And the same contract can be read multiple ways. A state can see gambling, a federal regulator can see derivatives, a platform can see information markets, capital can see a new asset category. The play is older than the headline. Whenever a new financial product blurs categories, the first fight is rarely about the product itself. It is about jurisdiction. Crypto had this fight between securities, commodities, banking, and payments. Sports betting had it between state gambling law and mobile platforms. Now, prediction markets are having it between state gambling law and federal derivatives law. The Minnesota lawsuit is the opening move. The category will be defined inside the courtroom, not inside the platforms. Prediction markets are not just bets on the future. They are a fight over who gets to turn uncertainty into infrastructure. The category shift keeps surfacing. Sometimes it sits inside something as ordinary as a shipping container. On May 19th, the U.S. charged 7 Chinese executives and 4 shipping container companies with allegedly restricting supply and fixing prices in a market that produces about 95% of the world's standard dry shipping containers. The institutional language calls it criminal antitrust. The deeper read goes somewhere else. Most consumers never think about container supply, container leasing, or container availability. But those containers shape the cost of furniture, electronics, food, medical supplies, retail inventory, construction materials, and manufacturing inputs. When supply is allegedly restricted or prices are allegedly fixed, the burden does not stay inside shipping. It migrates across the economy and lands without announcing itself inside what people pay at the register. And working families absorb the markup long before the system gets around to naming the cause. Containers are boring until they become the choke point for everything people buy. Once you see what the system counts, what it builds, and what it relabels, the next pressure point is what it protects, what it produces, and what it is willing to act on. On May 21st, the International Court of Justice issued an advisory opinion affirming that workers and trade unions have the right to strike under a major international labor treaty. That label is too small. This is global law reaffirming collective refusal as part of labor design. That matters because institutions are redesigning work around efficiency, automation, productivity, surveillance, and cost control. The right to strike reminds the system that labor is not only input, labor is agency. The worker is not simply a cost center. The worker can still refuse. And when that gets written back into the design by the highest court in the world, that is the system reminding itself of something it had, without announcement, stopped saying out loud. While institutions redesign labor around efficiency, global law is reminding the system that collective refusal is still part of the design. The workforce issue does not stop at the right to refuse. It includes who gets credentialed in the first place, and this part should matter to anyone watching the public service pipeline. 24 Democratic-led states and D.C. sued the Trump administration this month over new federal student loan caps affecting graduate and professional programs, with particular concerns around nursing, physical therapy, and social work. Now think about what those degrees actually produce. Clinicians, social workers, therapists, educators, public administrators, the people who hold the public service workforce together. When financing caps restrict access to those degrees, the system is not only limiting debt, it is deciding which workers it is willing to produce. Operators close to the pipeline recognize this. When the rules narrow below the headline at the credentialing level, the downstream effects show up later in shortages, in stratification, in who can afford to enter public service in the first place. That is how a workforce gets shaped without anyone admitting they are shaping it. When financing rules decide which degrees count as professional, the system has already decided which workers it is willing to produce. The final signal lands at the most serious altitude of the week. Do not rush past this one. Reuters published the visual investigation on May 20th, reconstructing 3 days of killings in Al Fashir in Darfur, using videos recorded by Sudanese paramilitary fighters and survivor accounts. Read that twice. The evidence was recorded by the perpetrators themselves. This is the accountability design of the current era. Perpetrators record themselves. Fighters post proof. Survivors leave testimony. Investigators reconstruct events from fragments that were never meant to serve justice but become evidence anyway. The governing tension is no longer whether proof exists. The fight underneath is whether institutions will act when perpetrators record the proof themselves. That is a different test entirely. The age of atrocity is also the age of self-documentation. The evidence is no longer the question, the will is. So let me bring this together with you. 12 signals from the past week, one pattern. Maternal harm is being measured by the system that softens it. Public health expertise is being recoded as political labor. Forest science is moving farther from the land it studies. The AI buildout is becoming local heat, temporary towns, and the same extractive housing playbook that ran through the oil patch. Nuclear energy is becoming a philanthropy lane. Nicotine is becoming a wellness category. Prediction markets are becoming a jurisdiction fight. Containers are becoming a choke point inside consumer prices. Global law is reaffirming the right to refuse. Student financing is deciding the future workforce. And Darfur is testing what institutions will do when the evidence records itself. The visible stories look disconnected. The structural read is not. This is the hidden cost of ordinary life. The relocation of cost before the public has language for what is being built. The recoding of categories before institutions decide who has standing to object. And the decision made without announcement over and over again about who the system is willing to see, fund, protect, and produce. The system is changing what it counts, who it protects, where it places the burden, what it relabels, who gets to turn uncertainty into a market, and how much evidence it can absorb before silence hardens into policy. And before we close, return with me to where we started. Because if you only carry one signal out of this week, let it be this. A data set that softens harm for Black mothers is not a technical problem. It is a political decision dressed in clean institutional language. The numbers that should drive funding, urgency, and care are being trimmed before they ever reach the room where the decision is made. The harm is not invisible. The system is just trained to look past it. That is the read. This week's instruction. Watch what gets reclassified, not what gets reported. When the category language changes, the capital is already moving. Read the language. And that's the brief for this week. Good to be in the room with you. Until next time, this has been CR Change Request.